Everything changes the day you realize that the people who promise to stand beside you are nowhere to be found. Have you ever wondered why the moment your life begins to fall apart, the room suddenly becomes quieter, messages stop coming, calls become rare? The people who once wanted your attention seem strangely absent. Most people believe this happens because others are selfish, but the truth is far more unsettling. I am the Watcher, and here in Shadow Insight, we don't chase comforting stories. We observe the hidden mechanisms that quietly shape human behavior. Watch carefully, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why people often disappear precisely when you need them the most, and why this pattern has far less to do with your worth than most people will ever realize. With time, you begin to notice something strange. People love to celebrate success. They admire resilience. They applaud confidence. But suffering follows very different rules. Human nature changes when weakness becomes visible. And once you understand why, you'll never look at your relationships the same way again. If you're drawn to uncovering the invisible side of human behavior, consider subscribing. And if you've ever experienced this kind of silence when everything around you was collapsing, let me know in the comments. Because what you're about to discover isn't just about abandonment. It's about one of the oldest psychological patterns hidden beneath human relationships. Have you ever noticed how quickly a crowd can disappear? When life is going well, people seem naturally drawn to you. They answer your messages, they invite you out, they laugh at your jokes, they ask about your projects. It feels like loyalty. But most of the time, it is simply comfort. Then something changes. You lose your job, your relationship ends. Your business begins to fail. Your confidence starts to crack. And almost without warning, the atmosphere around you becomes different. The same people who always seemed available suddenly become busy. Replies become shorter. Plans are postponed. Some disappear without a single explanation. Others remain, but only from a distance. At first, you take it personally. You wonder if you did something wrong. Maybe you became difficult to be around. Maybe you talk too much about your problems. Maybe you're simply asking for too much. Most people spend months blaming themselves before they begin asking a much more important question. What if this isn't really about you? Watch carefully. Human behavior follows patterns that rarely become visible during comfortable times. Friendship, kindness, loyalty. These qualities are easy to display when nothing is being tested. But pressure has a strange effect. It removes decoration. It exposes priorities. It reveals who is emotionally invested and who is only enjoying the version of you that required nothing from them. Think about a workplace. Someone gets promoted and everyone congratulates them. That same person loses their position a year later. Suddenly, conversations become shorter. People avoid eye contact. Lunch invitations quietly disappear. No one announces that they're leaving. They simply drift away. The same pattern appears after divorce, after financial hardship, after public failure, after illness. The strange thing about people is that they often believe they're being compassionate, yet many unconsciously distance themselves from pain because pain makes them uncomfortable. Not because they hate you, but because your struggle forces them to confront something they'd rather avoid. Most people never realize that support is easiest to promise before it's actually needed. The real test begins the moment helping someone requires emotional energy, patience, sacrifice, or uncertainty. And that's when human nature slowly starts revealing itself. So why does this happen? Why do people who genuinely seem to care slowly fade away when your life begins to collapse? Because the human mind is constantly protecting itself. Most people don't wake up and decide to abandon someone. The process is far more subtle. Jung believed that people often hide the parts of themselves they fear the most. Your suffering becomes an unexpected mirror. When they look at you, they don't just see your problems. They see a possibility they desperately hope will never become their own. If it happened to you, it could happen to them. That thought creates discomfort, and discomfort makes people retreat. Have you ever wondered why some people suddenly change the subject when you speak honestly about your struggles? Or why they offer advice almost immediately instead of simply listening? It isn't always because they lack empathy. Very often, they're trying to silence their own anxiety. If they can quickly fix your problem, they no longer have to sit with the uncomfortable realization that life can become unpredictable overnight. Adler observed that human beings naturally seek a sense of security and control. When someone close to them loses that control, their own feeling of stability begins to shake. Without realizing it, many people respond by creating distance. Distance protects the illusion that chaos only happens to other people. This is why superficial support often disappears first. The friend who loved sharing good news with you, the colleague who enjoyed your confidence, the relative who admired your achievements. These relationships were often built around positive emotional exchanges. But when those exchanges become uncertainty, fear, frustration, or sadness, the emotional balance changes, and many people quietly leave. Not because your value disappeared, because the relationship suddenly required emotional resilience they never developed. Watch carefully. This is one of the least understood truths about human behavior. Most people believe compassion is a personality trait. In reality, compassion is also a psychological skill. It requires someone to remain emotionally present without needing immediate comfort for themselves. Very few people ever learn how to do that, and that's why difficult seasons become unexpected filters. Not because they reveal who loves you, but because they reveal who can tolerate another person's pain without running from their own. This is where the illusion finally breaks. Most people believe relationships are built on loyalty, but loyalty is rarely tested during comfort. It is tested when staying close becomes emotionally expensive. Watch carefully. Human beings are naturally drawn toward environments that preserve their emotional balance. Someone who is confident, successful, optimistic, often becomes a source of positive emotion. Being around them feels rewarding. It provides reassurance, inspiration, sometimes even status. But when that same person begins to struggle, something invisible changes. The emotional exchange reverses. Instead of receiving certainty, people are confronted with uncertainty. Instead of feeling inspired, they are reminded of vulnerability. And many relationships cannot survive that shift. Nietzsche once suggested that people are often far less disturbed by suffering itself than by what it reveals about existence. Your downfall reminds others that life is not as controllable as they want to believe. That realization is deeply unsettling, so they search for explanations that restore their sense of order. Maybe you made bad decisions. Maybe you weren't careful enough. Maybe you deserved it somehow. Notice what this accomplishes. If your suffering is entirely your fault, then they can continue believing they are safe. Blaming you becomes a form of psychological protection. It creates distance between your life and their life. Because if misfortune can happen without warning, then no one is truly protected. The strange thing about people is that they often confuse explanation with understanding. They don't analyze your situation to understand you. They analyze it to reassure themselves. This is why some people become strangely cold when you are at your weakest. Not because they enjoy your pain, but because acknowledging your vulnerability would force them to acknowledge their own. And there is another hidden mechanism that almost nobody talks about. Your hardship quietly changes the balance of power. When you need help, you become dependent. The other person now has choices. They can help, ignore you, delay their response, disappear completely. For some, that imbalance creates responsibility. For others, it creates comfort. Power doesn't always reveal itself through control. Sometimes it reveals itself through absence, through unanswered messages, through promises that never become actions, through people who say, "Let me know if you need anything," while secretly hoping you never ask. Most people never realize this. The greatest disappointment is rarely discovering that strangers won't save you. It's discovering how many familiar faces were only present while your life required nothing from them. Now comes the question that almost nobody wants to ask. What if this has happened to you before, but you never noticed it? Have you ever disappeared from someone's life simply because you didn't know what to say? Have you ever delayed replying to a friend who was clearly struggling? Have you ever convinced yourself that they probably needed space when the truth was that you felt powerless? This is where the pattern becomes uncomfortable, because the same psychological mechanisms we've been observing in others can quietly exist within us. The difference is rarely between good people and bad people. The difference is awareness. Watch carefully. Most people believe support is measured by grand gestures. It isn't. When everything falls apart, people rarely remember who gave them perfect advice. They remember who stayed, who answered the phone, who listened without trying to solve everything, who remained present when there was nothing to gain. Human nature always reveals itself eventually, not through words, not through promises, but through consistency. Ironically, your darkest seasons often give you something your brightest seasons never could: clarity. The collapse strips away illusion. You stop confusing attention with loyalty. You stop mistaking admiration for genuine care. You stop believing that every smiling face is part of your inner circle. For a while, this realization feels painful. It can even make the world seem colder than you imagined. But over time, something unexpected happens. You become more careful with your trust, more intentional with your time, more grateful for the few people who never left. And perhaps the greatest paradox of all, the people who remain during your worst moments are rarely the loudest, the most charismatic, or the most impressive. They're often the quiet ones, the ones who never needed an audience to prove they cared. Because true loyalty doesn't become visible when life is easy. It becomes impossible to hide when everything else falls apart. So, why does no one seem to help when everything falls apart? Because hardship doesn't only test your strength, it quietly tests everyone around you. Some people disappear because they lack empathy, others because they fear vulnerability, others because your pain forces them to confront truths they'd rather avoid. And some simply don't know how to stay present when there is nothing they can fix. That was the hidden mechanism we promised to reveal. The silence that surrounds you during your darkest moments is not always a measure of your worth. More often, it is a reflection of other people's emotional limits. Watch carefully. This doesn't mean you should become cynical. It means you should become observant. Your hardest seasons are not only shaping you, they are exposing the invisible architecture of every relationship in your life. Human nature always reveals itself eventually, not when people are making promises, but when those promises become inconvenient. If this video made you see human behavior differently, let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered who your real supporters were only after everything started falling apart? If you're interested in uncovering more of the hidden mechanisms behind human behavior, subscribe to Shadow Insight. I'm the Watcher, and I'll see you in the next observation. But before you leave, ask yourself one question. If your entire life collapsed tomorrow, who would still answer your call?